One of the most infamous executioners in history is John C. Woods, an American hangman whose work during the Second World War was rather questionable. Woods was known for being the Nuremberg executioner, in which those former Nazis who were condemned to death for crimes against humanity at the end of the conflict were to be executed on a gallows inside of Nuremberg prison's gymnasium. But the story of John C. Woods' executions and his status as an executioner is rather dark, and how he was even allowed to perform the most high-profile executions in the immediate post-war aftermath in Europe is rather strange. Much regarding Woods is surrounded in mystery, including the debate about how many people he actually executed, as some sources say it was as high as almost 350, but others claim he executed around 60 to 70 people. But what is the story of the botching executioner of the Nuremberg executions? Join us today as we look at this, and to support our channel, as always, please make sure to subscribe. John Clarence Woods was born on the 5th of June 1911 in Wichita, Kansas, and he would be raised by his grandmother. His parents divorced when he was just 2, but he had a rather troubled upbringing, and he would later drop out of high school after only being present for 2 years. When he was 18, he would join the US Navy on the 3rd of December 1929, but within a few months he would realise that a career in the military probably wasn't for him, and because of this he went AWOL, or absent without leave, which was of course a rather serious military offence. When he was arrested, he was brought to court-martial and was convicted by this, but he had been assessed by a psychiatric board in April 1930, and what they found was rather interesting. Woods was found to have been suffering from what was referred to as psychopathic inferiority without psychosis. The doctor's report stated that this patient, though not intellectually inferior, gives a history of repeatedly running counter to authority, both before and since enlistment. Stigmata of degeneration are present, and the patient frequently bites his fingernails. He has a benign tumour of the soft palate, for which he refuses operation. His commanding officer and division officers state how he shows inaptitude and does not respond to instruction. He is obviously poor service material. This man has had less than 5 months' service. His disability is considered to be an inherent defect for which the service is no way responsible. He is not considered a menace to himself or others. But with this, Woods was then dishonourably discharged from service, and he would return to civilian life with this on his record. He went back to Kansas and performed a number of different jobs, completing manual labour, but this would not be the end of his career inside of the military. As the Second World War waged on across Europe, John C. Woods would return to the military, but in August 1943 he would enlist in the army this time, and he was then assigned to Company B of the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion, the 5th Engineer Special Brigade. Some historians have claimed that he would be involved in the D-Day landings and possibly landed on Omaha Beach, the deadliest beach that the Allies would land on, but this has been debated. One historian says of this that he did not get wounded on Omaha, but he saw a bunch of guys get killed. I'm sure he thought, I do not want to go through that experience again. He volunteered to get out of combat engineers. He is accepted and promoted from private to master sergeant, and his pay goes from $50 to $138 a month. But at this time the American military executions were being carried out in the southern England. If an American serviceman committed a crime worthy of the death penalty, then inside English prisons executioners such as Thomas Pierpoint and Albert Pierpoint would hang them back in Britain. But the Americans then began to search for their own executioner, who would carry out this sort of work in Europe and in France. Of course, following the D-Day landings, there were some American servicemen who were sentenced to death for their crimes, and with this they turned to John C. Woods to carry out the executions. Let's remember that Woods was a man diagnosed with psychopathy, and he would serve as the main executioner for the hangings of at least 34 American soldiers in France during 1944 and 1945, and he would also help in the hangings of other soldiers, and it's believed that at least 11 of these executions were performed poorly, and they did go wrong. Woods had falsely claimed to the army authorities that he had experience as an assistant hangman, executing 2 people in Texas and 2 in Oklahoma. There is no recorded evidence to suggest that this is true, and the army did not bother to check this either, and because of this they just hired Woods. They could very easily have checked if he had experience, but this was not the case. In fact, it was very obvious he was lying, as both of the states mentioned used electrocution at the time, and not hanging. So John C. Woods was given the job as an executioner, and he had no idea really what he was doing. His first execution in Germany took place on the 29th of June 1945, and he would execute 3 Germans who had murdered an American lieutenant. In the November of the same year, he was called up again to execute many condemned people at once, as he would on the 10th of November 1945 hang 5 Germans who massacred American airmen. But he then became known for being a butcher and an executioner who attracted negative publicity. As one journalist wrote, "John Woods was a short, muscular sort of man, and I would describe him as kind of the world's flotsam. He talked the language of the hobos and flotsams, and the people who did these kind of jobs." He would serve as the American Army's hangman in Germany throughout 1946, and he would also execute 14 men who were convicted of crimes at Dachau concentration camp. There were so many that needed executing that in May 1946 he would take 2 days to complete the jobs. He worked at other German prisons such as Landsberg and would hang a German policeman for murdering an American airman, but then John C. Woods' biggest and most infamous job came. After the war had come to an end, the remaining members of Hitler's Nazi hierarchy, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and many other senior figures in Nazi government, were brought to the Nuremberg Trials. Many leaders were brought in front of the world's cameras to answer for the crimes of the Nazi Party, and crimes against humanity and war crimes. There were 12 men who were sentenced to death, although one, Martin Bormann, was sentenced in absentia, and Hermann Göring would take his own life the day before the executions were scheduled to take place. So those 10 remaining defendants were executed by John C. Woods, and he would use the standard drop method, which was considered one of the least reliable when compared to the long drop method. One worry with this was that if the drop did not go well, then the head of the condemned could come off. But the executions of the Nuremberg defendants would be botched by John C. Woods, and very few of them went correctly. It was in the early hours of the 16th of October 1946 that these were carried out, and one by one the 10 men were brought into the execution chamber, Nuremberg Prison's gymnasium, where the gallows had been constructed. Some of these men would die slow deaths, and they were strangled, and their necks did not snap. Wilhelm Keitel, the military field marshal's death, took 28 minutes, when he plunged through the trapdoor, and he would slowly strangle to death. One of the problems with the executions was that there was not enough room for the trapdoor, and that the men would not have sufficient room to plunge through at the right velocity, leading to their necks not being snapped, and the majority died from slow strangulation, which was not intended. Some were even hit by the trapdoor on their way through, and they would be left bloodied as they were kicking and struggling. Julius Streicher, a horrific Nazi journalist, also suffered a very botched execution. He was a man who was evil and virulent until the moment he plunged through the trapdoor, and it was said of his execution, when the rope snapped taut with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Finally, the hangman Woods, who had descended from the gallows platform, lifted the black canvas curtain and went inside. Something happened that put a stop to the groans and brought the rope to a standstill. After it was over, I was not in the mood to ask what he did, but I assumed that he grabbed the swinging body and pulled down on it. This means that Wood himself pretty much finished Julius Streicher off, pulling down on his body to make him die quicker. But the executions took around 2 hours to complete, and John C. Woods would save his work that morning. 10 men in 103 minutes, that's fast work. And he was allegedly proud of the work he'd done that day. He said, "I hanged those 10 Nazis and I'm proud of it. I wasn't nervous, a fellow can't afford to have nerves in this business, and I want to put a good word for those GIs who helped me. They did swell. I'm trying to get them a promotion. The way I look at this hanging job is that someone has to do it. I got into it by accident years ago in the States." But he did attract some criticism and continued to lie about his previous experience. Following the end of the war in Europe, he was drafted across to the Pacific, and he would die in the Pacific in a rather bizarre accident. John C. Woods, whilst changing a light bulb, was electrocuted as he stood in a puddle of water whilst this happened, and what was rather apt is the fact this would have killed him a lot quicker than the executions of those defendants at Nuremberg that he hanged. But John C. Woods was a strange executioner who had lied about his credentials so he could in a sense legally kill. He was diagnosed before with psychopathic tendencies, and he was able to get a job where he could kill people, which was rather strange, and the American Army turned a blind eye to his previous experience. The fact he would take a job to kill without any knowledge of how to do so shows you the sort of man he really was. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.